Dear listeners, welcome to the Deep Journal channel. By subscribing to our channel, you can follow our independent comments on the latest news. Iran surprises every day in the Middle East like a bad joke. Today, Iran said that if necessary, they can make nuclear weapons. Their reactors are sufficient for this and they can enrich uranium by 90%. Even the possibility of this happening should worry the US and Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, the former Prime Minister of Israel, blamed the new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and the U.S. administration for Iran's progress in the nuclear field and its return to negotiations. He also harshly criticized the new Israeli government's attitude towards Israel and the United States. Netanyahu also stated that he is worried about the nuclear developments in Iran and that he is afraid of not being able to make his voice heard to the United States. Iran's President Rouhani will leave his post to Raisi in August. The new president of Iran, which we expect to have a much tougher stance, may have headaches in the nuclear field. Still, Iran's new president says they are not in favor of nuclear weapons and would happily settle for restrictions in the JCPOA if he lifts sanctions from the United States. So how realistic can that be? Will Iran simply curtail its reactors that are close to making nuclear weapons? Would an aggressive Middle Eastern state like Iran miss the opportunity for nuclear weapons? Iran, which has suffered so much from the sanctions of former President Trump, the new President Biden, who is more lenient and tolerant towards Iran, and how can the Iranian president, a rookie and execution judge who refuses to meet with Biden, meet in the middle? Considering the last 2 weeks, Iran-backed militants carried out a series of attacks on U.S. military bases and troops after the U.S. carried out 2 airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. The attacks were carried out with new-generation drones and advanced missiles. 2 U.S. soldiers were also injured. The Biden administration waited patiently against all these harassments. Now a nuclear bomb emerges from the surprise egg. Despite Israel's constant warnings, the U.S. administration may not take it seriously. The administration, which draws attention with its very relaxed and frivolous attitudes towards cyber attacks that are thought to come from Russia, exhibits the same attitude in the Middle East. Biden seems to have a little trouble taking it seriously. It is difficult to tell whether it is from his 50 years of experience in politics or his old age. However, if something needs to be taken seriously, cyber attacks against the USA and developments in Iran may be one of them. Now let's examine the surprise nuclear weapons statement from Iran and Israel's opposition to the US and Iran. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu sparred over who is to blame for advances in Iran's nuclear program. Netanyahu repeated his criticism of Foreign Minister Yair Lapid for agreeing to "no surprises" with the U.S. when it comes to countering the Iranian threat, in an article for Israel Hayom. Iran said on Wednesday it could enrich uranium up to 90% purity, weapons grade, if its nuclear reactors needed it, but added it still sought the revival of a 2015 deal that would limit its atomic program in return for a lifting of sanctions. President Hassan Rouhani's remark is his second such public comment this year about 90% enrichment, a level suitable for a nuclear bomb, underlining Iran's resolve to keep breaching the deal in the absence of any accord to revive it. The biggest obstacle to producing nuclear weapons is obtaining enough fissile material, weapons-grade highly enriched uranium or plutonium, for the bomb's core. Iran says it has never sought nuclear weapons. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization can enrich uranium by 20% and 60%, and if one day our reactors need it, it can enrich uranium to 90% purity, Rouhani told a cabinet meeting, Iranian state media reported. The nuclear deal caps the fissile purity to which Tehran can refine uranium at 3.67%, well under the 20% achieved before the pact and far below the 90% suitable for a nuclear weapon. Iran has been breaching the deal in several ways after the United States withdrew from the agreement in 2018, including by producing 20% and 60% enriched uranium. Rouhani, who will hand over the presidency to hardline cleric Ibrahim Raisi on August 5, implicitly criticized Iran's top decision-makers for not allowing his government to reinstate the nuclear deal during its term in office. They took away the opportunity to reach an agreement from this government. "We deeply regret missing this opportunity," the state news agency IRNA quoted Rouhani as saying. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, not the president, has the last say on all state matters such as nuclear policy. Like Khamenei, Raisi has backed indirect talks between Tehran and Washington aimed at bringing back the arch-foes into full compliance with the accord. Former U.S. President Donald Trump quit the deal 3 years ago, saying it was biased in favor of Iran, and reimposed crippling sanctions on Tehran. The sixth round of nuclear talks in Vienna adjourned on June 20. The next round of the talks has yet to be scheduled, and Iranian and Western officials have said that significant gaps still remain to be resolved. Two senior Iranian officials told Reuters that President-elect Raisi planned to adopt a harder line in the talks after taking office, adding that the next round might resume in late September or early October. One of the officials said many members of Iran's nuclear team might be replaced with hardline officials, but top nuclear negotiator Abbas Araghchi would stay, at least for a while. The second official said Raisi planned to show less flexibility and demand more concessions from Washington, such as keeping a chain of advanced uranium enrichment centrifuges in place and insisting on the removal of human rights and terrorism-related U.S. sanctions. Trump blacklisted dozens of institutions vital to Iran's economy using laws designed to punish foreign actors for supporting terrorism or weapons proliferation. Removing oil and financial sanctions is essential if Iran is to export its oil, the top prize for Tehran for complying with the nuclear agreement and reigning in its atomic program. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu sparred over who is to blame for advances in Iran's nuclear program. Netanyahu repeated his criticism of Foreign Minister Yair Lapid for agreeing to "no surprises" with the U.S. when it comes to countering the Iranian threat, in an article for Israel Hayom. What will happen if and when the U.S. will return to the nuclear agreement? Does anyone think it will agree to Israeli military actions that will endanger the agreement? Netanyahu wrote. The opposition leader said his friends in the U.S. expressed concern that Israel's voice is not heard in the U.S. in opposition to the Iran nuclear deal. The answer is simple. The government of surrender says clearly, "We will solve the problems with the U.S. behind closed doors," Netanyahu wrote. Instead of speaking in a loud and clear voice to enlist American public opinion in favor of Israel and against a return to the nuclear deal, the current government is doing nothing. A source in the Israeli Prime Minister's office said that Netanyahu was Prime Minister for 12 years, up until a month ago, and his neglect was what allowed Iran to reach the most advanced point ever in its nuclear program. Last week, Iran told the International Atomic Energy Agency that it has taken steps to produce uranium metal enriched to 20%, to be used as reactor fuel. This brings Iran's nuclear project to a more advanced stage than any country without nuclear weapons is known to have reached. The source close to Bennett said that, "This is the inheritance Bennett received, and from here, he will navigate and fix it with all the tools he has. This is a severe failure," he added. Netanyahu knows this and is trying to throw the responsibility onto others. The source accused Netanyahu of preferring to give speeches with props as part of his Israeli election campaign, rather than take critical action. The gap between rhetoric and action has never been greater, the source said, echoing remarks by Bennett in the Knesset earlier this week. The U.S. and Iran have been engaged in indirect negotiations to return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal signed in 2015. The agreement, which restricted Iran's uranium enrichment and gradually lifted U.S. sanctions on Iran, is set to expire in 2030 and allow Iran to get close to breaking out to a nuclear weapon. The Trump administration left the JCPOA in 2018, opting instead for heavy sanctions to pressure Iran, but the Biden administration began talks with Iran in Vienna in April to return to the deal. The sixth round of indirect U.S.-Iran negotiations ended in early June, before the presidential election in Iran. Ibrahim Raisi, a judge responsible for thousands of executions and sanctioned by the U.S. for human rights violations, won that election. The date for the resumption of negotiations, and whether Raisi will opt to continue at all, remain unclear. As of today, no one, including Iranians, has an answer to when the talks will continue. Russian ambassador to international organizations in Vienna Mikhail Ulyanov told Kommersant this week. Netanyahu's Likud party responded to Bennett by quoting remarks he made 3 years ago that the future of our children and grandchildren is much safer today than yesterday, and I think that those who mocked and criticized Netanyahu on the Iranian matter should thank him. The Likud spokesman added, instead of lying and whining, Bennett would be better off canceling the no surprises policy today, which alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid committed to, and start on a campaign for American public opinion against a U.S. return to the dangerous Iran deal.